Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is the Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to ranting and raving about board games, but usually more the ranting part. Well, it's another one, guys, yep. Because every friggin' franchise needs to get in on the duel front, whether it's Seven Wonders, King of Tokyo, Tokaido, you name it. There is a duel version for just about everything these days. So at first, yes, I did kind of roll my eyes thinking, well, the Isle of Cats now has a duel version. But then I kind of thought to myself, well, hang on a minute. The big, clunky, massive Isle of Cats, as I said, can get a little bit on the clunky side. I don't want to play it with a lot of players. It takes way too long. It's not a short game by any means. It takes a while to do all the different rounds and do the drafting and do the scoring and the public lessons and stuff. And it's like, oh yeah. And then that Flippin' Right came out. I forget the exact name, but I gave it a pretty decent rating. It allowed me to play the Isle of Cats solo with a pretty decent solo mode, or maybe with 2 to 3 players in a roll and write fashion. Well, Flippin' Right, I guess. I don't think there was a dice in it. So the idea maybe that this one is for 2 players only might work. Who knows? Worth a try. So, will this actually replace the other 2 that I have just mentioned, or is this going to be another forgettable entry in the duel, the duel universe? I don't know. It might as well be its own universe by now, but we're going to have to wait and see.
I think not, baby puppy.
So if you played Isle of Cats, you already know the gist. There's a bunch of cute little kitties on an island, and you're trying to save them, you get them on your boat, and it's a polyomino Tetris style game where you're putting all these different shaped pieces on here as efficiently as you can, although being efficient isn't necessarily the aim of the game here. The way it works is that it takes place over 4 rounds, each one playing pretty much exactly the same. You first set up this central board with a cat tile on every green space, but then also with some lesson cards, or some of these might be instant power cards, on the card spaces. So you're effectively going to have about 10 cats and about 5 cards out. This Oshax cat, legendary cat per se, will start at one corner, and then essentially all these spaces have got footprints between them, and on your turn you can move this cat up to 2 spaces, and you're allowed to take one of the items here from either where you started, where you've passed through, and where you finished. So effectively, typically, you can pick from 3 different things. If you take a card, it might be a special instant ability, it might be collect tiles, but most of the time it will be a lesson card which scores you points at the end of the game. So 7 points if you've got the largest family of cats, for example. And there's a bunch of unique ones in this deck. But alternatively, you'll go onto a cat tile, which, much like the original game, you've got a board with several rooms, rat tokens, rat spaces that are -1 point, and the idea is that you will place your cats however you like on your board. So first one's got to go pretty much anywhere as long as it doesn't hang off the edge, and then subsequent cats must touch at least another tile that you've done. So you have to sort of build out from where you started. But what you're essentially trying to do with the cats is you're trying to cover up the rat spaces because they're minus points. You want to try and complete as many of the rooms as possible because that's minus points if you don't do it. But the primary thing that you are trying to do is create families of cats. So basically, a family of cats is 3 or more cats of the same colour touching each other by an edge somewhere. It doesn't matter how you do it. And there's 5 different colours in the game, so there's a lot of different colours that you've got to try and get on your boat. But you obviously can't get huge families of every single colour. You've got to pick and choose your battles, and of course the lesson cards might gear you into certain things. Like, for example, 9 points if you have exactly 5 purple cats on your boat. Okay, well, I'll get a family of 5 purple, and then I'll leave it at that, and I'll think about other colours. The round carries on until players either consecutively pass twice or everything's taken off the board. In order to pass, you basically move your cat and don't do a selection for that round. Sometimes you don't want the tile, sometimes the card's of no interest to you, or sometimes you just can't physically reach the space. You do have fish tokens, which give you optional actions, like, say, move the cat further, take 2 tiles, teleport the cat to somewhere else, but essentially it's all about mitigating the movement and the spacing on that board. Rinse and repeat for 4 rounds, and then you total up on your score pad for points for various size families, all the lesson cards, minus points for the rooms and rats, and then see who's got the most.
Of course!
Yep, not a lot of rules there, and honestly, if you've played Isle of Cats, most of this is pretty familiar. Getting the cats on your board, building the families, being efficient, covering the rats, using the lesson cards, all of that, treasure tokens, fish tokens, the works, pretty much 99% identical to normal Isle of Cats. The main difference is how you select the tiles and the cards in the first place, and also the fact that fish tokens in the original game had like a special use, whereas here they're basically used to do optional actions, which is mostly to take treasure or move around this board. But the selection mechanic is pretty much where this game differs, because all of this on your board is essentially identical. It's all about the selection idea. So normally in the big game, you drafted the cards first. So you drafted cards, some of them helped you take more cats off a selection of tiles in the middle of the table, some got you more lesson cards, some were used for specific abilities and such, but here you primarily have lesson cards that score you points at the end of the game. There's a few that get you treasures and the odd few instant ones that get you extra fish, but that's about it. For the most part, they are blue lesson cards and all unique. The cat tiles, exactly the same artwork as before, the same style of polyomino as before. It's just the fact you've now got this little cat moving across the board and selecting your tiles. So with everything being quite similar to the big game, do you actually need the big game anymore? I gotta admit, I'm actually thinking you might not, because really the only thing that you miss from this version of the game compared to the big one is really mainly 3 things. Firstly, you can only play this with 2 players. So there's no solo mode and you can't play this with 3, 4, or 5. Okay, fine. But then I never really wanted to play Isle of Cats with more than 4, and even 4 was a bit of a push. Then you also lose the drafting phase. So you don't draft cards or anything, you're moving this piece around the board and collecting stuff. I can take or leave losing the drafting phase, honestly, because not having the drafting phase means you don't have those extra cards which were like, ripped up baskets that you had to do, and boots for initiative and stuff like that. You don't have to worry about here. It's just alternating turns. And finally, the last thing it takes away is the public lessons, which I didn't really care about anyway. You didn't have that many public lessons out in the big game, and they were just fiddly to deal with. People missed out what they did. It was like, whatever. It was a half decent idea, but whatever. If I lose them, I'm not really going to care. But other than that, everything you do on this board is the same. If you enjoyed all the Tetris putting together of the tiles, trying to keep the family of cats together, trying to satisfy the lesson cards or whatever, all of what was in the big game is here in a much more condensed package. The rulebook, really easy. There is no ambiguity here. It's got the color guide, it's got the the different, it's even got lore for the cats. I don't think you quite need that, but it's got scoring examples, it's got pictorial examples, it tells you what each section of the boat is, how to set it up. It's not a big rule book at all. I mean, we literally from the first bit just said, I gotta play this game. We got it out of the box, I read through the rule book, once over, we knew all the rules. Never had to look up another rule again. It was that easy. But everything else is printed on your board. You've got the scoring system on your board for the families and the minus tokens. It tells you all the actions you can do with the fish. All your board is easy enough to look at, and the cards are simple enough that you don't need any kind of FAQ to really explain them. It's just super simple, super easy. Isle of Cats was never that heavy a game. It was pretty easy to get, but this one is just even lighter and even less complex. The selection board mechanic, though, I'm sort of in 2 minds. On the one hand, it's very simple. On another hand, it's, you do have sight of what tiles are available, what cards are available. So based on what you can see at the start of a round, you know what sort of things you can aim for and chop and change tactics on your own board. But I do miss the drafting phase to an extent, but I never really found it difficult to get from A to B on this map. You can spend fish actions, 1 fish to move an extra space with this thing. 2 fish will teleport it to another space. Well, you've got footprints that go between the spaces, and there's so many of these footprints between the spaces that it's pretty easy to get to where you want to go without even having to spend any fish, let alone having to spend that much fish. Now, you don't get that much fish during the game. In fact, you pretty much only earn it from occasional rare cats that give you a fish, or from the instant cards, which typically say gain a fish max free for doing some particular thing. But other than that, fish aren't that plentiful. But as long as you're not spending the fish to constantly get treasure tiles all the time, which is 2 fish per 2, you could spend 3 fish to get 2 things in a turn. I mean, that's pretty cool, but I don't know, this didn't feel quite tight enough. The cat is there, and yes, you might be restricted. I got to spend a fish to go over here, but I couldn't really block the opponent from getting what they want. All you can kind of do is gear them in a direction so that they'll take a cat that they particularly want, so that you can get a lesson card that you particularly want. But at no point do I go, right, I'm going to go over here, and I've denied you a purple cat. Haha. Not unless I actually take it myself. Maybe I don't want to take it. That's the thing. So this whole moving around kind of just feels a little bit unnecessary. Not to say that it's terrible, but you are basically more playing the cards and the tiles that are on the board and thinking about whether the opponent is likely to take certain ones over others than you are really caring about the restriction of movement on the board, because really it doesn't feel like much of a restriction. But it plays in a very quick time, 30 minutes on the box, and that's pretty accurate. 45 absolute tops for your learning game if you're taking your time, but 45 minutes should be the absolute max this takes. You can get through 4 rounds in about 30 to 40 minutes with ease, because the rounds don't take too long. You've got essentially 10 cats and 5 cards on this board between the two of you, so you're probably going to take about 7 or 8 things each, depending on whether you end the round early or not. And once you put it on your board, you're done. Move on to the next player. Turns are pretty quick, turns are pretty swift. Yeah, there's not much else to say. This is Isle of Cats with 2 players. What more do you really need to know? You don't draft the cards anymore, you don't have the whole basket boots thing, and it's not a flip and ride, so there's no like dice or flipping of cards or anything like that, and you don't have public lessons. That's basically the only difference. Other than that, I get the same level of enjoyment of placing everything on my boat than I did in the big version. So do I need the big version? I don't think I do, honestly. I honestly think that this, if you're happy with only playing this with 2 players, there is no reason to own the big version. Grab this instantly. Why grab the big version with 2 players? It's just not worth it. But then, if I want to play Isle of Cats multiplayer, I'd rather play the flip and right one that came out, because I think that one's better. It's quicker, it's less clunky than the big version of Isle of Cats. So between that and this 2-player version, I honestly don't think you need the big Isle of Cats anymore. I think it's now pretty much redundant. It's a huge box, tons of stuff in it. The expansions added way more cards than was physically necessary, and the game takes quite a while to finish and is terrible with like 5 or 6 players. Really, do not play Isle of Cats with a massive group. Just take the flip and right version and grab this one for 2 players. Simple. That's all I do. I just wish that maybe this whole movement mechanic around the board was a bit tighter. That's kind of the main weakness of this game. This doesn't feel restrictive enough to enable you to block out other players from doing stuff. So Isle of Cats Duel gets a fine 7 out of 10 from me. It's decent, it's good, I give it a seal of endorsement, and I think it's probably the one to go for if you want to play this with only 2 players. It's quick, simple, and has that same Tetris feel. But if you want to play it multiplayer, then maybe you'll have to go for the big version. But then honestly, I think the flip and right version is a better game than the big version. So just grab that one, and then at least you can play it solo. So, the world's your oyster. You've got 3 to effectively to pick from. It's up to you what you want. I'm just telling you that this is a pretty solid entry in the whole Duel universe. It's one of the better Duel versions I've seen. It's not going to measure up to the levels of 7 Wonders Duel or anything like that. But yeah, this is definitely a pretty decent one. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Your viewership and engagement helps to keep this channel going. And for the you patrons out there, your funding to the channel helps keep this afloat. So if you haven't subscribed to the Patreon, please consider doing so. By all means, let me know your thoughts. Which of the 3 do you prefer? The Isle of Cats Duel, the Isle of Cats Flip and Right, or the big Isle of Cats? Give me your reasons why. Is there any one of these 3 you particularly dislike, and why? I'd like to know your thoughts and comparisons. Until next time, remember, regardless as if you are willing to abandon this cute little kitty cat on an island all by itself, you monster, it's still only a game. So bye for now.